Hello, Sorcery fans. Welcome to another Arthurian Legends pre-constructed deck tech video. Today I'm going to look at the Witch Avatar deck. This is the only unique avatar in the Arthurian Legends set. Previously, you saw my deck tech videos on the Druid deck, the Archimago deck, and the Templar deck. I have since upgraded the Templar deck and then graduated to the Witch deck after opening a couple copies of the Witch in recent Arthurian Legends box openings. So here's the Witch. If you're not familiar with it, it's a unique avatar. The foil version is like $400, so I just have the non-foil version, which is around $17, $18. Normally, you can tap this avatar to play or draw a site like every other avatar, but also you can tap this avatar to curse target avatar, and you choose one of the following. Their spells cost 1 colorless more to cast on their next turn, or they lose 2 life, or they have -3 power until your next turn. So this turns the Witch into a kind of a planeswalker with multiple abilities. It's good against the Battle Mage deck or Enchantress, I think. Otherwise, it's not a really good matchup. I saw a couple other deck builders on the Eric's Curiosa Sorcery deck site that were pretty good. I went with sort of a budget deck, and I'm using fire and water elements. So it's a blue-red fire water element sorcery witch avatar deck. So there's my avatar, and I'll show you the cards in this deck in this video. Do like and subscribe if you're interested in collecting sorcery cards, learning how to play the game, and play with your friends. I'm a big fan of the artwork, and I do like collecting the sets of sorcery. So you can subscribe to my channel, jdj-sapphire. You can also check my eBay page, which is also jdj-sapphire. I'll put a link in the comments below where you can buy my pre-constructed decks and follow along with the deck explanations. I'm using the Cursed Land playmat from the Alpha Investments kit because there are some cursed lands in this pre-constructed deck that uses a witch, so you can see that this matches up with the playmat here. And it's a very low level entry deck. There's one card in the deck that I'll talk about when I get to the unique section. Peasant Revolt is a key card in this deck. You can pick it up for about $4 or $5 on TCG Player or eBay. Check my eBay page. It destroys everything that's unique or elite in the realm. I'm guessing it also destroys itself when you cast it. So for that reason, most of the cards in this pre-constructed witch deck are going to be ordinary or exceptional, with a few elites and a few uniques. And I saw a few decks that use the charge function. So I'm going to include a couple things in this deck that utilize charge, and I'm also going to include Faeries because I think Faeries could be useful in this deck. So it's sort of a two-pronged attack. It's got the charge ability and it also has Faeries, and then there are some cards that have some synergy with Faeries. And construction-wise, it's about 50-50. 50% of the cards are fire threshold, and then 50% of the cards are water threshold, just so it's easy to cast either or. Same thing with the atlases and the mana base. 50% of the atlases are going to be fire threshold, 50% of the atlases are going to be water threshold, and I'll go through each of them right now on the channel. So I'm including 4 copies of Charge, which is an ordinary magic. It costs 1 colorless with 1 fire threshold, and it's pretty obvious it gives an ally charge this turn. So your Faeries probably won't have charge, so that's why I'm using that card in this deck. I'm also using 4 copies of Hamlet's Ablaze for removal. This is an aura that costs 3 colorless with 2 fire threshold. You conjure atop an ordinary or exceptional site, and at the start of your turn you destroy this site and minions atop it and Hamlet's Ablaze. So it's kind of a board wipe. You could play it on your opponent's sites and get rid of their stuff. It's also fire element. Now onto the blue water elements. We've got some helpful hobs These are ordinary fairies. As I mentioned before, the fairies are going to be a key component of this deck. So I have 4 copies of Helpful Hob. It's ordinary. It costs 4. Colorless with 2 water threshold, and it has power and toughness of 1. Its Genesis ability is key here, though. It untaps an adjacent ally. So that'll be helpful when we get to the fairies. Then we have 4 copies of ordinary Shellycoat. Shellycoat is also an ordinary fairy. It has Submerge and takes 1 less damage when it's attacked, and has power toughness of 2. It costs 2 and 1 water threshold. So I'll put that in the fairy pile. I also have 3 copies of Giant Killer, which is an exceptional mortal. Water threshold. Costs 3 to cast with 1 threshold of water, and it's a 2 power toughness. But its Genesis ability is it kills a nearby giant. So if your opponent is playing giants, you could use the Giant Killer to remove their giants. I'm going to include 3 copies of Pukas, which are also fairies, but they're fire fairies. They cost 3 colorless and 2 fire threshold, power toughness of 2, and its death right ability is that each opponent discards a card at random. So it's be useful for removal. It is also a fairy. So for now, I'm going to put it in the fire pile, and then I'll show you in a little bit how many fairies versus how many non-fairies we're using in the deck. Sugar Plum Pixies is an exceptional fairies. Water element, costs 2 and has 1 water threshold. Again, 2 toughness power. It has airborne though, so you can attack from the air. And at the end of your turn, you untap another nearby ally. So that's another water element fairy there. I'm going to include 3 copies of Warhorse, which is an exceptional beast. Costs 2 with 1 fire threshold and has power toughness of 2. So a lot of small creatures here. It also has charge, and it may carry an ally. So you can use the charge ability, and you can also carry one of your fairies and make a beeline for your opponent's sights. I'm going to put that up here with the Pukas. And I'm also going to include 2 copies of Brother Knight. Brother Knight is an elite mortal. It would get wiped out against Peasant Revolt, but its Genesis ability is that when you search your spellbook or hand for another Brother Knight and you summon it here and then you shuffle it. So that's why I'm going to include 2 copies of the Brother Knight, because we'll want to be able to play one and search for the other one and put it into play. I'm going to include 2 copies of Monstrous Lion, which is also an elite beast. Costs 4 and 2 fire threshold. It has power toughness of 4 though. It has charge, just like the Warhorse, and it cannot attack sites though. That's the only drawback on the Monstrous Lion. I'm going to include 2 copies of Salmon of Knowledge, which is a really fun water element card to play. It costs 3 colorless, 2 water threshold, and it has power toughness of 0, but it has Submerge. It also has Waterbound, and other units at this site may fish, which means that they tap and roll a d20, and when they roll a 14 and plus on the d20, they get to banish Salmon of Knowledge and to draw 3 spells. So it's kind of fun. It's also kind of like an Ancestral Recall. That goes in the water elements. And the final 2 elite fairies, I'm going to include 2 copies of Sealy Court. This costs 6 mana and 2 water threshold, and it's a 5 toughness. And at the start of your turn, players draw a spell for each fairy in the realm. So this would be helpful because we have, those are fairies. Also, Pukas are fairies. Helpful Hob, Shellycoat, and Sugar Plum Pixies are fairies. So that would be 3, 6, 10, possibly 12 fairies in the realm, which is about 25% of the deck. Not too bad. We're going to include Nelly Longarms, which is a unique fairy with water threshold and casting cost of 3 and power toughness of 2. It has Submerge, and you can, when you tap it, it shoots a projectile. If that projectile hits a unit, you get to drag it to that site, and then Nelly may submerge it. Art is by Jeff Menges. That is a unique fairy, bringing our total up to 13 fairies in the realm. Peasant Revolt I mentioned earlier. This is a unique magic, and it costs 5 to cast, 3 fire threshold, but it destroys everything unique or elite in the realm. So this would get rid of all of your opponent's unique and elite cards. I'm going to include 1 copy of Sir Agravain, which is a water fire Sir. It's elite in rarity, but unique in card text, so you can only include 1 copy in your deck. It has stealth and movement +1, and whenever another ally attacks an enemy adjacent to Sir Argavain, he strikes that enemy afterwards without losing stealth. So that's going to go into the deck. And the final spellbook is 1 copy of the Lady of the Lake, since we are a water deck. It costs 3 colorless and 3 water threshold, and it has power toughness of 3. She is a spellcaster, just like the Witch avatar, and she has Submerge on your water sites. And her Genesis ability is that you may summon a mortal or artifact from your cemetery to Lady of the Lake's location. If you do, you shuffle her into your spellbook. So I would use this to summon any of the mortals. We don't have any artifacts in this deck. We could include artifacts if we wanted to upgrade, but any of the mortals, like Sir Argavain, we could fetch from the graveyard, shuffle that in. Now the sites, I'm going to use 20 sites. I have 40 spellbooks, so this is going to be a 60 card 40-20 deck. I'm going to use 4 copies of Bonfire, which is an ordinary site. And again, I tried to make this entirely deck out of Arthurian Legends cards. You could also include beta cards or alpha cards if you wanted to, but I wanted to concentrate on the Witch avatar, get better at using it, and also kind of work on just the charge mechanics and the fairy mechanics. So I'm using all of these cards to do that. And so to make it easy, I'm going to include 4 copies of Bonfire, which is a fire site atlas from Arthurian Legends. Its Genesis ability is that you may destroy all weapons and armory nearby. And since I don't have too many weapons or armory in this deck, it's great because it will just destroy my opponent's armory and weapons. Next, I'm going to include 4 copies of Pond, which is an ordinary water site. Its Genesis ability is this turn, the next beast cast into this site costs 1 less, ignoring threshold. So I have a couple beasts in this deck. Pond would let me cast the War Horses and the Monstrous Lions for a discount. I'm going to include 3 copies of Funeral Pyre, which is an exceptional. You can play 3 exceptionals in your deck. Its Genesis ability is to banish up to 3 cards from 1 cemetery, and it is a fire threshold. So I could probably banish cards from my opponent's cemetery. I'm going to include 3 copies of Troll Bridge, not the Toll Bridge Curios, but these are water sites. And the first time a lone enemy enters here each turn, you strike it unless they discard a card. So that's good to get protecting against your opponent's attackers. 2 copies of Cursed Land, like I mentioned before. This is an elite fire site, and whenever another site is played nearby, its controller loses 2 life. So I like to play this on my opponent's side of the board. 2 copies of Kelp Cavern by Drew Tucker. Its Genesis ability is to look at the bottom 3 spells. You put 1 on the top of your spell book. And then the last 2 elite sites, I'm going to include 1 copy of Valley of Delight. It's an elite site for the Footloose and Fancy Free, it says. Its Genesis ability is to choose any element, air, earth, fire, or water, and this site provides that permanently. So if I'm behind on fire sites, I can make this a fire site. If I'm behind on water sites, alternatively, I can make this a water site. And then finally, the last card is an atlas. It's a Wizard's Den. It's a colorless atlas. It is elite, but its Genesis ability is to let you draw a spell, and then you discard a spell when the site is first attacked successfully. So I do like the fact that it lets you draw a spell. Color-wise, we have 4, 7, 8, 9, potentially 10 fire sites, and we have 4, 7, 8, 9, potentially 10 water sites. So it's a very even mix, 50-50%. Like I said, 50% is fire, 50% is water, and again, about 25% of the deck is fairies, and the other 25% is mortals and beasts with charge. So it's a very evenly built deck, I think. I'm going to try it out and test it with my friends. Let me know what you think of this witch deck. Give it a thumbs up if you like witches or playing Sorcery Arthurian Legends cards. Let me know in the comments, too, what beta cards you would add to this to make it slightly better. I feel like there's Blaze might be good. There's some good beta cards that I think that would make this deck a lot better. But I'm going with Charge and Fairies. Let me know what you think. Appreciate everybody for watching and subscribing. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers. Check out my box opening playlist if you want to see more Sorcery Arthurian Legends content, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, everyone.